Climate change is a totally natural phenomenon. The Earth's climate patterns are so complex that the activity of the sun, the planet's rotational wobble, volcanoes, and the large-scale presence of certain plants and animals can drastically change a region's weather patterns and environment over time. Today, I want to look at how climate change has historically played a major role in the collapse of civilizations, how this works, and what that means for us going forward in the 21st century. Spoiler alert, it's a really big f***ing downer. Make sure to like and comment below so that the algorithm gods let me make more fun educational videos. My sources are in the description, and I make other world building and Minecraft YouTube content as well, so go check those out and I will love you into the oncoming climate apocalypse. The Khmer Empire, or pronounced correctly as the Khmer Empire, was a state of Cambodian civilization that existed from the 800s to the 1400s CE. At its peak, it held massive amounts of land, people, and cultural influence. Its capital of Angkor, and particularly the site of Angkor Wat, is a testament to this, being the largest temple complex in the world. Around Angkor Wat, you can see these huge man-made ponds. The Khmer civilization built a massive amount of hydraulic works like canals, irrigation networks, and reservoirs, which were all really beneficial to the Khmer's ability to grow lots of food and practice lots of trade. Like many civilizations, the Khmer Empire was built on an economic foundation of food production. With a lot of food, they could support a large population and could get a lot of work done, such as building sites like Angkor Wat or expanding their territory. The problem here is that successful agriculture is dependent on a variety of other things, particularly involving the environment and weather. And once you get a lot of people with your successful agriculture, you can't turn back without a lot of suffering. So during the climactic transition between what's called the medieval warm period and the subsequent Little Ice Age, when everything got just a little colder, the region was hit with several decades of drought, interspersed with really intense seasonal monsoon storms. Scientists used tree ring cores from South Vietnam to reconstruct these intense dry periods and wet events. What would have happened to the Cambodians then was crops couldn't grow during the droughts, their hydraulic infrastructure wouldn't be as useful because there wasn't enough water to fill it, and the abrupt heavy storms that did come through would have flooded and damaged that infrastructure. The inland agricultural systems suffered greatly, especially in the southern lowlands where Angkor Wat is. The Khmer at Angkor went from being a very socially complex society with regional hegemony to a simpler one with fewer people. Cities were abandoned, large-scale trade decreased, and occupational diversity declined as much more people had to work the land as farmers. The capital of Angkor was attacked by the neighboring Thai Empire, and the Khmer collapsed. This ushered in what is conventionally called the Cambodian Dark Age. Complex agricultural societies all share a similar foundation. To get a lot of economic specialization and expertise, you need the farmers to be able to produce a lot of food. Without a lot of surplus food, you can't get enough people to specialize in certain traits. You don't get as efficient allocation of resources and energy, and you don't get as much wealth or occupational diversity. This is extremely simplified because obviously societies are very complicated, but no food, no big civilization. No big civilization, no cool things like antibiotics, cookies, or Netflix. Really complex civilization is like a big house of cards where stable food production makes up a bunch of the cards on the bottom. So the Cambodians set up an agricultural system that was really good for the environment that they found themselves in. But when the environment changed, even slowly, that threw a big wrench into the agricultural system, and it didn't work enough to sustain the big civilization. When stress is put onto a civilization like that, you often see the society that's built up get jostled around at almost every level, or even collapse completely. When people are starving and the government can't or isn't doing anything to help, they often revolt against the government, or they start wars with people around them for resources, or they flee as refugees to escape the problems that are causing the hunger. Funny part about this, a bunch of people in world history would try to fix these problems by sacrificing goats. A+ course of action there, guys. Of course, not everyone will die, and new societies will pop up that have advantages according to the new status quo. For example, the reformed Cambodian society was more powerful along the coast than inland, and they made their money and food through maritime trade, not through as much agriculture and domestic trade as the Angkor Khmer had. So when climate change comes along and destroys a people's ability to grow food, it often causes a host of problems from inside and outside a society. This isn't the only reason why civilizations fall, but clearly it can be a very strong one. Perhaps a more famous example of civilizational collapse, the Maya repeated this pattern 500 years before this. Classical Mayan civilization flourished between 200 and 900 CE in the southern Yucatan and Guatemala. This environment is quite harsh for agriculture. It has a long, dry season each year, and it's on mountainous limestone. They couldn't rely on rivers or ponds because they're in a dry rainforest, as weird as that term is. The Maya then had to develop complex hydraulic systems, just like the Khmer. These systems would collect summer rains and store them year-round, distributed for irrigation and drinking by aqueducts and canals. However, evidence from oceanic sediment cores and tree rings shows that between 800 and 1000, the region saw severe climate change and even more drying. Dry spells afflicted the Maya for decades, particularly around 760, 810, 860, and 910. Roughly. There was also increasingly prevalent deforestation, erosion of topsoils, and a decrease in biodiversity in the region. These three things coming from Maya expansion and agricultural practices. As these environmental pressures built up, it coincides with a time period of increased intensity of war between regional powers, peasant revolutions, weakening trade routes, and famines. The southern lowland Maya civilization collapsed. The once great cities ended up having the population numbers of towns and villages. They stopped building massive structures, and they were politically overshadowed by new Mayan societies that sprang up north. The reason the north survived is because they had more access to water reservoirs, as the massive underground cisterns which filled with water were closer to the flat limestone surface of the northern Yucatan than in the mountainous south. They also developed new agricultural practices and systems of political rules. Again here, we see climate change as a large reason why a complex society becomes destabilized, turbulent, and collapsy. Even though they had a good thing going, climate change made all that work less effectual and cut their food supply, causing violent social issues. You may think, well, there was still the later Maya civilization in the north, but I can assure you that those who were living during the Maya collapse were not thinking about it like that. I bet they were more concerned with things like food, usurper kings, and not dying in wars. Those all sound like a not very fun time, not very wholesome 100 if you know what I'm saying. And another one of the many examples I could give. The story repeats in Mesopotamia. The first empire to unite the whole region, Akkad, saw massive droughts that pretty much decimated rain-fed agriculture, which was vital to the livelihood of the northern Mesopotamians. There was a massive refugee crisis as they all went south, and the political and social instability that this caused weakened the regime so much that invaders from nearby Gutium attacked and conquered Mesopotamia over the next few decades. Again, it's more complicated than that because a lot of things happen to cause and affect a collapsing civilization. But environmental change is often an independent factor that really helps to push things along in a new, exciting, violent direction. Oh boy! So you know what that means. Look, I'm not gonna go into the data. I don't need you to believe that humans are causing climate change. We already have evidence of rising global temperatures, melting ice caps, rising sea levels, and increased intensity of droughts and tropical storms. And a lot of scientists know the mechanisms behind it. At this point, if you're refusing to recognize what's going on, we might as well sacrifice you to the rain god because you'll be more useful that way.
You take care now!
It's literally a meme how much drought and ecological collapse California is going through. America's top agricultural producer, might I remind you. We need big pipe aqueducts to just sustain the growth of Los Angeles and California's agricultural sector, so how's it gonna work if the droughts kill those water sources? The Great Plains and their agriculture are drying up the Ogallala aquifer that they rely on, and tornadoes, hurricanes, and flooding are getting worse and worse in their respective areas. And I think I know what some of you might be thinking. We have global trade. We don't need agriculture so much. It's fine. Yes, our globalized civilization is the most complex in all human history, but it still functions in pretty much the same way. The people who mine our minerals, run the cargo ships, generate the electricity, and run our science experiments all rely on primary food production to be able to do these things. We are still tied to the environment for our food and living space. And the climate change that is going on now is happening everywhere. Do I need to bring up the refugee crisis from the Pacific Islands that are already being flooded out? Because every part of our system is so interdependent on the others, it's likely that we'll see a lot of things come crashing down at once. And then we'll return to being filthy, feudal, farm peasants. I personally guess that it would look like, increased food prices, social unrest, military intervention, and a breakdown of our social political order. Not even that, the natural disasters and flooding of the lowland, east, and Gulf coasts could cause large-scale refugee crises in America. Think Katrina, but over and over again.
George Bush doesn't care about black people.
Not enough food to go around, people with nothing to lose, displaced families without healthcare, outbreaks of disease, and almost empty cities. My point is, we've seen this before. Coronavirus could look like a f***ing speed bump compared to this. Climate change isn't a problem, it's a problem factory. And the current trend in global temperatures is a faster, more dramatic, and more global change than all the climate crises that agricultural humans have had to deal with of the past. The only difference now is we're smart enough to know what's going on, and we have the tools to combat it instead of sacrificing goats. Maybe carbon capture will pull through and we can suck all of the CO2 into huge bricks of coal. That would be cool. But since the production of this kind of thing, again, relies on our incredibly specialized and interconnected system, if the system gets shaken hard before we make any significant progress, it's game over for how we understand modern human civilization. That's right, you heard it here first, folks. It's not the gays, it's not rock music, and it's not atheism that's gonna destroy society. It's capitalism. Am I being alarmist? Yes, you might as well call me an Old Testament doomsayer. Am I being unreasonable? No. A basic understanding of social systems is all it takes to gather that all the cool stuff we've built up may not survive the social stress that climate change can bring.
Everything burns.
I'm not gonna blame anybody, but I can't offer any solutions either. Maybe you don't eat that beef burger, turn off your light when you leave the room, or if you're feeling like a real activist, carpool. Honestly, the only solace in this scenario is that it probably won't be the end of human civilization. Only the way that we live it right now. Maybe we'll see a cool future America where Colorado takes over and they ride bears and shoot AK-47s. Maybe Michigan and Ohio will finally get that war that they've been wanting to fight for over a century. Maybe Rhode Island will declare independence. We'll finally be a real island, everybody! So, yeah, climate change is bad.